Working animals are often conceptualized as a phenomenon of the pre-industrial age. Historians regularly assume that working animals became obsolete in the process of industrialization, urbanization, and the modernization of agriculture. But a closer look at the development of the urban transport systems and the mechanization of agriculture production in the 19th and 20th centuries illustrates that working animals played a crucial role up to the middle of the 20th century. They were, in other words, agents of modernization and not, as often perceived, phenomena of a pre-industrial era. The presentation first gives an overview of the relevance of working animals in Switzerland and then illustrates the variety of working animals in European countries: horses, mules, donkeys, cows, cattle, oxen, breeding bulls and dogs. It then illustrates 3 specific forms of human-animal interactions at work. All the film clips used are taken from films accessible via the online portal of the European Rural History Film Association. Animals were seldom categorized and counted as working animals in the official statistics, but nonetheless they were statistically relevant, and their numerical relevance can be reconstructed. The number of working cows, for example, can be calculated from scientific investigations which were undertaken into the working capacities and the use of cows as working animals in the 1930s and 40s. In the weather-depending cultivation of living resources, it took more than half a century to turn the strong but clumsy steam power machines of the 19th century into light, versatile motor-driven machines which could compete with animal power. It was only after World War II when the animal-driven machines were outnumbered by the number of tractors. It is important to remember that not only oxen and horses were working, but dogs, cows, breeding bulls, donkeys and mules as well. Dogs were not only used for protecting goods and herding cattle and sheep. They also played a crucial role when it came to transporting goods to the markets. In the 19th and 20th century, they became particularly relevant for transporting milk from the farms to the creameries and for carrying milk to the consumers in the cities. All animals are multifunctional creatures. Cows, for example, were not only producing meat and milk, they were also used in many regions as draft animals. In order to balance their milk and draft performance, they seldom had to work more than a few hours per day. Breeding bulls were difficult to keep since they often became dangerous for those who had to handle them. But work was considered as easing their character, and there is clear evidence that working bulls were kept longer for breeding than those who lived idle on farms. Donkeys were often used as pack animals. They were known to be frugal, persistent, and often as stubborn as their masters. Horses were not only the strongest and fastest, but also the most prestigious working animals. Laborers responsible for the horses on a farm, for example, were better paid and had a higher reputation in the local community than ordinary farm laborers. Up to the 20th century, most of the urban transport systems were depending on horsepower. Cities, therefore, often had a far higher horse density than rural areas. Since the cities could not produce the feed for their horses, they simultaneously shaped their rural surroundings. It was in the countryside where the feed for the horses and the horses themselves were reproduced. Animals, like men, are not simply born to work. They have to learn it before they can perform it. but the teaching techniques varied across cultures and time periods. Fowls, for example, usually were free to roam beside their working mothers in the first year. Then they were tied to a pulling adult in order to get adjusted to the working rhythm. Only if they were 3 or 4 years old they were eventually expected to work along older companions. Both men and animals got tired when they were working. Unlike motor-driven machinery, they were not able to work continually without resting. As living resources, they further had to eat regularly. When men and animals were working together, they also rested jointly and ate together. Children, like men and women, were an integral part of the peasant economy. Often the burden of work was too heavy for children. But the film sources also indicate that working with animals was an empowering experience for many of them. An important aspect that becomes clear from the film clips is the close interaction of men, women and children with their working companions. Also, men decided unilaterally when the animals had to work. The work itself was always done in cooperation between human beings and animals. As Jocelyne Porchet, the French sociologist, has argued, work not only produces products, it also produces ties. Work, therefore, is profoundly ambivalent. It can be a means of alienation, but it can also be an opportunity for emancipation. The European Rural History Film Association is a network of archival and research institutions interested in films as a source as well as a means of communication. It maintains a database with information about several thousand films. The online portal contains a range of the so far digitized films. They are grouped by the institutions which make them accessible. The thematic collections indicate the variety of topics which are covered in the more than 450 online accessible films.